Welcome, dear viewers, to A Form of Sound Words. And do we have a show for you today? This interview is a long time in the planning and making. Today we have with us Pastor Steven Michel. He is the pastor of Crosspoint Baptist Church in Navan, Ontario, which is an eastern suburb of Ottawa. And full disclosure, he is my pastor. And I am so pleased he was able to find time in his extremely busy schedule for me. Pastor Michel, welcome to A Form of Sound Words.
Well, it's great to be on your program. Thank you for the invitation. And the fact that we finally got it arranged is great. Thank you for your persistence.
I'm nothing if not persistent. So, Pastor, usually when I do interviews, I like to start with origin stories. So who are you? Where did you come from? What was your upbringing like? If you can flesh out your family life, siblings, and so on. And then maybe we can progress our way up to education and so on, and just basically take us through your origin story, and prepare to have me interrupt you often to get some spicy little details.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, from some small towns in Ontario. So, as I mentioned, the town, probably you wouldn't have heard of it. Born into a town in Blackstock, Ontario. And then from there, a few years later, we moved up to a town called Little Britain, Ontario, and then ended up in North Oshawa. So the last one many would probably have heard of. So that was my childhood years, and I was raised in the woods and near farms, and so I love the country life. And so living in the city of Ottawa and ministering here has been certainly an adjustment at times. But I enjoy the country life. I enjoy the farms, the countryside, and just spending time outside. Yeah.
So if you can help me situate myself, these little towns that you've mentioned, were they all kind of like on the outskirts of Toronto? Because when I think Oshawa, I think Eastern Toronto. Is that more or less where?
So Toronto did the same thing as what Ottawa did, the amalgamation. So when we're talking GTA, we're talking within 30 minutes of the GTA. Oshawa would be part of the GTA now, but Blackstock, 20 minutes, Little Britain, about 30 minutes from that area. And so, obviously, since I moved away, it's been a growing part of the city as that expanse just keeps moving out. And so, it was a great childhood that way. I was one of 5 children. I'm the second born. So I've got an older brother and then 3 younger sisters. And I often tell to our church family that I was going to church 9 months before I was born. So I'm thankful for the godly heritage, a Christian upbringing, and really it's amazing to think of the work that God did in my parents' life, and really setting the stage for me and my siblings growing up. So I'm thankful for that I was raised that way. And growing up, we were often involved in either a Christian school or homeschooling. So my parents had a conviction about Christian education. And again, I'm thankful for that. And so they were able to provide that with great sacrifice for all 12 years of education. So right from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. So very thankful for that.
So that is this is a Dutch distinctive, isn't it? In Canada. A lot of Christian schools were actually started by Dutch reformers in Canada. And there was this thing, I would say, probably like in the 1970s, probably, that movement would probably hit its peak.
Yeah. And so when my grandparents came over to Canada after the war, they really tried to settle into Canadian way of life and become one with it. And part of their heart was for their children to be involved in Christian education. So for a few years there, my dad went to a Christian high school. And so they definitely had that background. My mother, not so much, but my father, being from the Dutch roots on his side, they had that experience for sure.
And how old were you when you went from these very small satellite towns into Oshawa, which now is, like you say, is Greater Toronto area? But I would imagine Oshawa would have been probably the biggest center you lived in your youth.
Well, I look at Oshawa as 2 different ways. So there's Oshawa, which is the core by the 401. and then there's North Oshawa. So North Oshawa is still the farmland.
Okay.
So we were
Okay.
still up in the farmland area,
Okay.
really about 15 minutes from the 401.
Okay. Okay. So always in rural areas.
Yeah.
So you grow up there. You spend those youth, the youth years. At what point do you head out to school? Like now we're talking post-secondary or
Yeah.
higher education.
Yeah, so I was saved at a young age at home, and I was really thankful for that, coming to know the Lord as a boy. And growing up in church, we ended up going to Port Perry Baptist Church. That's where my father was saved in years ago, in the mid to late 70s. And so when I was born in 1980, I grew up, some of the first 12, 13 years of my life was going to that church. We got to a point where, yeah, my parents were looking for some educational help with homeschooling becoming more of a challenge with 5 children. And we came across a school called Faithway Baptist School. They had an elementary school and a high school. And we moved over to that church and school when I was in grade 9. And so it was in grade 9 when I first saw my wife, which was in the same grade as I was. And yeah, once I set eyes on her, I knew I had the rest of my life planned out. And by God's grace, that did work out that way. But yeah, we got there in grade 9 and kind of spent my high school years there, 4 years there. At the church as well, they had a Bible college, a small Bible college. At the time that I was there, it was about 80 students. And so the student to teacher ratio was very good as far as mentorship opportunities with some men who are very experienced in ministry. And so I was thankful for some of that smaller high school, even smaller college life, where they could really pour into our lives and spend the time necessary to really mentor and develop us. And so that really is where I did kind of my bachelor degree, Bachelor of Theology, was through Faithway Baptist College.
And you said that but by the way, dropping, being born in 1980, you have no idea how it vexes my soul to know that you are the first pastor who's younger than me. You're the first pastor I've had who's younger than me, and
I hear this
that
often at church.
oh
Everyone says, "You're how old?"
yeah, oh my.
But every year
Uh,
I'm working on that, that age thing. So as the years go by, it gets worse.
so you said you laid your eyes on your wife first time in high school there. So tell us a little bit how that was like. How did the meet actually take place, and how long did it take for things to develop to a point where, you knew that's it, like that's the one?
Well, I already said that the moment I laid eyes on her.
Wow.
No, no. So we came to the church on a Sunday evening, and this was a Sunday evening just before my grade 9 year started. And so it was the week before that. So we come into a Sunday evening service, and we were singing some of the songs and hymns, and then there was a special just before the message. And my wife was part of a trio that stood up that evening and sang, and she was right in the center, and I still remember it like yesterday. She was wearing a red dress, her hair was all done up nice, and I looked at her, I thought, wow, she's very good looking. And I thought she was 16, 18 years old, and here I am 13. And so after the service, a number of them came to welcome some of the new kids that were there, and my brother and myself and my siblings were part of the new kids. And so my wife tells a similar story. I'd let her tell that some other time, but it seems like we both had eyes for each other at the same time. And so, yeah, I just
That's
appreciate how that worked out.
That's pretty awesome. I
Yeah.
had a similar experience though in my college years where I had attended a college and career meeting at the Metropolitan Bible Church, and Sylvia, my wife, that night was responsible for the introductions. So whenever somebody new came around, everyone said their names and so on. So she was, and I remember having a good look and thinking, yeah, yeah, that would do very nicely, and it did.
Yep. And we're
Um,
often asked, how do you know? Well, my answer to that is you just know. I don't
yeah,
know.
it is the most frustrating answer to give,
Yeah.
like to somebody who's single and who's looking and praying about these things, and yet it's so true.
Yeah.
You just know, and
Yeah.
I feel for my brothers and sisters who are in that situation, but it's just like it's the answer. Unfortunately, it's just you just know,
Yeah.
which is, I really think that it's of the Lord. If obviously if you're looking to honor God in relationships and so on, I think the Lord just makes things very clear and evident when it
Right.
comes around.
Right.
And yeah, um, when were you married?
In June 10th, 2000. And so we were married 23 years ago, coming up to our 24th year next year.
So you would have been young. You would have been
19 years old. So we were
wow.
engaged when I was 18. I proposed to my wife and she said yes. And so at 19 years old, we got married. And
Well,
yeah, so
well
young married
done.
couples.
Well done. Waste no time. That's what I say.
No.
Yeah.
And then so if you do the math too, that's still in Bible college. And
Mm,
I don't advise college students to take that step of marriage during their college years, but it was after our second year of Bible college. And we realized, and this is sometimes how I counsel, is if you can do life better together than apart. And for us, we both realized that. We both counseled with our parents as well as all of our pastors, and we sought counsel about that, and all of them were in agreement. And so we went ahead with that step of marriage, and that meant we still had 2 years of Bible college. Now, God provided greatly, because to pay two college bills
mm.
and to, begin life as a newly married couple, and then yeah, to try and plan for the future, that's tough. So we both worked two jobs on the side plus full-time school. And so there were busy years, but we both look back and we'd say it worked for us, but I'm not sure if it would work for every couple that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And I think that's one thing that I have always had a problem with relationship books and teachings. Where it's like the Lord really works it out that
That's right.
there's a lot of individualism in this, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and these one size fits all, and if you're not doing it this way, then you're falling in sin, so on. Like I've
Yeah.
always, yeah, yeah. I think there's a reason why there's no, other than the obvious, there's no real prescription in Scripture, right, as to
Right.
how people meet and get together and so on, because there are so many factors.
Oh yeah, and we still tried to, like I was saying, sought counsel about it, and we were ready if someone was objected to that, showed some objection to that, that we'd seriously consider not.
Mm.
But when the way seems clear ahead, we just followed the Lord, and one step after another.
So post school, did you go immediately into ministry?
So I had an opportunity to serve an intern position at our home church. And so where I graduated from, I stayed on staff basically for about just under another year. And an opportunity opened up to, well, I should say stayed on staff. I was working full time and doing the internship position. The following year, an opportunity opened up to be on a full time ministry position. The church was in the States, so it was in Michigan. In Canada, many of our churches are small, and so to get a full-time assistant pastor's position is a rare thing.
Mm.
And so when this came up to get some real ministry experience on a church staff, we prayed about it, we sought counsel about it, and we took that opportunity, and involved moving to the States, which I am Canadian born, Canadian bred, and this is where my heart is. And I have been praying about church planting in Canada since before Bible college. And I've seen the need for that. So when the Lord was leading us to the States of all places, I mean, the idea of Canadians is, well, the States has a church on every corner.
Yeah.
Well, that may be true in some areas. There are definite needs down there. And so as we made the move down there, we were part of a church staff. The church is about 400 people. There was 3 pastors, so myself and 2 others. And I was hired onto a position that I was not qualified for. But the pastor said, I will invest in you. I will help to train you if you demonstrate to me a pastor's heart. I said, well, that's where my heart is.
Mhm.
And so the position was actually a music and outreach pastor.
Okay.
The outreach I had been familiar with, the music, not so much. And so I started down there. We transitioned down on a Sunday after. We spent the Sunday morning there, our very first Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon came around and it was choir practice time, and I was the music guy. Well, number one, I had never led a choir. And I step into the auditorium. He goes, "Okay, jump in, learn to swim." And I stepped into the auditorium and there was 55 people in the choir. And I looked at it and I thought, what have I agreed to do here? The most I had done is basically a congregational song leading. He was gracious and the choir was gracious and they were patient with me. And over the next 3 years, I had different opportunities for training and got to sit under some great men who were much more experienced than I was. Frank Garlock and some other guys, Roger Powell, and some other men that had led some fairly large choirs, and got to learn from them and glean from them. And so now I've been leading choirs for the past 22 years almost.
And this church was where?
This was in Fostoria, Michigan. Again, another small town nobody's ever heard of. But if you hit Port Huron, Sarnia, Port Huron, and you go about an hour, just over an hour in, you'll hit M24 up to Lapeer, and it's just north of Lapeer.
Okay. And you were there for how long?
We were there for almost 3 years, just about 3 years. I only had a 3-year temporary visa.
Okay. And then and so you're this young pastor just starting out. You're learning basically to be a choir master, and I would imagine a pastor in making, more or less.
Yeah, and that was the mentality, was come in and pastor a group of people. And so that was our mentality as a staff. Every ministry we had to pastor those people. So I had 55 people in the choir. I pastored those people. I had about 45 people in a married couples class, and I pastored those people. And then I was in charge of bus ministries and outreach. And so I was organizing all of that too. And then on the buses, we ran 3 buses every Sunday, just picking up kids. Well, actually 4 buses every Sunday, picking up kids. We'd have about 100 to 150 children coming in every Sunday. And so we'd run the VBS programs, and we'd have almost 200 children out to that too. And so there was many areas of ministry where we were always practicing that pastoring position. And so as we were very busy in ministry there, and there was always something going on, and for a country church, it was a church that was doing a lot. Not only in the community, but also within the walls of the church. So it was a great training ground as far as being full-time in ministry, getting ministry experience. I am so appreciative to that church and just their patience and willingness to grow with me and my wife as we developed. It was a unique thing though, about year 2, the Lord brought some specific circumstances into my heart and life, and then into my wife's heart as well. It was during a missions conference. There was one message especially that spoke to my heart, where I knew the States wasn't somewhere where I was going to be forever. And I don't know why it happened so quickly, but it was just before that year 2 mark. And I had this unsettledness, this uneasiness, where I just kind of knew the Lord was directing me to go back to Canada. I wanted to fulfill as much as I could with that 3-year visa, and definitely take some time to pray. So we prayed together for about a year, sought counsel, went and counseled with other pastors, including my own pastor down there that I was working with. I explained to him what was going on in my heart, and he identified that, yeah, my heart was more so to be in Canada, but still in a pastoral role. And so after much prayer and counsel regarding that, we ended up making contact with someone that we had contact with a number of years previously. In Bible college, there came an opportunity to help a senior pastor who was going through a health struggle. In the Ottawa area, he had developed cancer, and he had called down to the college. It was a 4-hour drive. He says, "Hey, can you send up any young preacher men who could help to fill my pulpit?" He was undergoing treatment and really sick at the time. And so they approached us with the opportunity. I jumped at the opportunity to go out and preach. And so I came up to Ottawa for one weekend and filled in at a church called Crosspoint Baptist Church. Never heard of it before. Never met the pastor before. I went over to his house for lunch during Bible college, and he was sick. He was on the couch. We chatted just for a few minutes. It was all he was able to do. And I left that day. Little did I know that that little encounter would be used much later in life.
So this is really important for people who have watched my first interview here. I would like for you to name this pastor because this is a really good callback to my first interview.
Yeah, George Covey, and you may recognize the last name. Yeah.
Yeah, so this would be Danny Covey's father,
Yeah.
and so you visit Carlton. Are you still living at that point though in the States? Are you still in Michigan at that point, and you're just doing the trip?
Right. So sorry, let me just clarify. I first came up to Carleton during Bible college and filled in just for one Sunday.
Okay, I see.
So then it comes full circle. I've been praying about where the Lord would direct us. I honestly thought and really was pursuing a church planting endeavor in Trenton.
Mm,
And we were looking in that Trenton Coburg area of Eastern Ontario. And I'd just been praying about it, months of prayer about what about Eastern Ontario? And there's something where the Lord laid on my heart. Well, little did I know how far east he would be directing. And so this opportunity comes up during this time of praying as I'm working on this church staff. Word comes to me that he's looking for a young man to mentor in ministry and to eventually transition his church planting endeavor over to.
mm,
So this is a number of years after our first encounter. I thought, oh, I've met this man before. This is years ago.
right,
We
right.
get in contact, we make a phone call. He invites me up to spend a weekend with him and to preach to the church and really more of a getting to know you, because our first meeting, he was sick on the couch and it was not a great meeting that way. So
Mm,
my wife and I drive up. We leave from Michigan, make the long drive up over here, and we spend the weekend here. And my wife and I had the chance to minister all weekend. It was Sunday evening. I can still remember it. We went for a walk. It was a beautiful evening in the summer. And my wife says, "How are you feeling about this? What are your thoughts after spending the weekend meeting with him?" And she thought full well that I would be saying, "Well, no, Ottawa's not for us," that type of a thing. So as we're walking, I'm explaining kind of what's going on in my heart. And I said, "You know what? I think this might be something that the Lord may be directing us to." And she was just kind of like, "Really? Are you sure? Is this really?" Because what it involved wasn't coming into a ministry position. I was on a full-time church staff and they looked after us. Coming to Ottawa, I'd be getting a full-time job.
mm,
The church wouldn't be able to support us as a salaried position.
right.
So in some ways, going from full-time church work to church work supplemented by full-time
Yeah.
work, it was going to be quite an endeavor to accomplish.
So I want to touch on that
Yeah, yeah,
because uh, I have in my Christian life I've experienced a lot of pastors who ministered and also had a secular job
right,
because these were very small churches and there was no way for the small churches to support a pastor full time.
right.
There's a few things I want to touch on. First of all, what did you do to make ends meet, basically? And secondly, speak to, by this point, your family's probably growing, right? It's probably not
Yeah,
just you and your wife at that point, and
right,
just the pressures and considerations that have to be calculated in this, because in the end, your children need to be fed, and there's got to be a
right,
roof over their heads, and so on. So
right.
please speak to that. What I'll say is the less than ideal situations. Being a pastor of a church is full-time work. It's
Mm.
hard work. And when you're splitting that with paying, having to work to pay the bills, it can be a really heavy burden.
Yeah, going from full-time salary to something that is unknown, for us, that was a step of faith.
Mm,
And so leaving that, the church was very gracious. It was very hard to leave such a great church in Michigan. But as we were coming back, there's a number of factors. When you're moving to a country, there's a number of factors, but also when you're moving back to a country, there are some unknown things you don't even realize. You spend some time out of your country, you forfeit some of those health insurance plans that Canada offers to
right,
you.
right.
So coming back to Canada, we had to supplement all of our own health insurance. So at that time, I had two children to provide for. Coming back, I had the opportunity to try and uh, set up that move a little bit better. So I had to find housing. I had to find all of this moving to a different city. So I had about a 3-month window where I returned and I actually stayed back at my parents' house. I mean, it's a humble thing to move back to your parents because I had such a big move to do. There was a lot to transition. And so at the same time, I had to find a job somewhere in the Ottawa area. I was thankful as well in my upbringing. My dad really invested in our lives to teach us, to train us spiritually, but also physically. He's a man who enjoys work and he knows the importance of it. He's a business owner, and that business is in the welding and fabrication business. And so I grew up doing that from a teenager on, and I had done it for a number of years and earned some tickets. I was a certified welder with the CWB as a welder supervisor. And so I had some of these tickets in my pocket that I thought, what is the Lord ever going to do with this for ministry work? And often I'd be laying over the torch and, welding along. And sometimes you weld for hours upon hours upon hours. And I'd be thinking and praying during that time, thinking, Lord, I know you've called me. How on earth is welding supposed to be used in ministry? Well, again, fast
Sure enough.
forward, and you never know how the Lord's going to use that. So in that 3-month window, I'm sending out resumes all over in Ottawa, trying to find a welding position. Little did I know that during this transition time, I was working for my father just to kind of try and make ends meet. One day, a customer was walking through the shop, and my dad said, "Hey, that customer's from the Ottawa area." I said, "Really?" I said, "Mind if I grab him for a second?" So right on the shop floor, the owner of the company and one of the sales managers was there. And I said, "Hey guys, I'm moving to the Ottawa area within 3 months." And I said, "Would you happen to have a job position?" They said, "Really? Well, you make all of these products." I said, "Yeah, I've made all of the units you own. I've had a part in making them." They said, "As soon as you land here, come and see us. We'll have you a position." I said, "Perfect." So I did all of my work sending out resumes, yet the Lord arranged a meeting right there and he provided. So we moved up to Ottawa. Right away, we had a job, and it was with Tomlinson Construction, which is a fairly large construction company here in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And so the Lord provided a great position where not only did I have full-time hours and really more hours than what I could ever want, he provided that way, but it was also a good paying job being a welder. And beyond that, when the church started to grow a little bit more, they wanted to take me on at least one more day a week. So I approached the company and said, "Hey," and I was open with them. I said, "I'm here to work in a church. I'm doing this to be able to work here." And so I said, "Would you be willing to give me one day a week?" And they did. I was the only one in the whole company that was able to negotiate a 4-day work week. And I had Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. And that happened after a few years, but God was providing every step of the way. So yeah, we
So,
moved here and he provided that.
so during that time, though, was Pastor Covey there? Were the two of you sharing the load together?
Right. So when I came on, I was his assistant. After a couple of years, they changed that to be more of an associate role, and he gave me more of the everyday responsibilities with bill payments. And by that time, later on, I was preaching every Sunday morning. I was teaching Wednesday nights, and so we were sharing kind of like a, I don't know, almost like a co-pastor position. And so we continued on like that for a little bit until the Lord finally led him to hand that over. Yeah.
Right. But it must have been nice during those years to know that there was somewhat of a safety net
Oh,
under you. Yeah.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And so, yeah, and the Lord even looked after that. So as busy as it was juggling both, I didn't have the full weight of that responsibility. Yeah, the Lord was really allowing us to slowly transition, which ended up just being an amazing gift that way.
And what kind of time are we talking about, this progressive transition?
Yeah, so for the first 4 years, I was working full time in the shop, and that was at 60 hours a week was full time for them. And then we were doing youth group and outreach and different things, responsibility with the church. After a while, the church family saw I don't know, the weight of all of those hours, and our family was growing. So at this time, we had 3 children, and my wife was pregnant with our 4th, and we were trying to keep all of this up. So the church, during that whole time, we were saving to build our building. So I understand a lot of the money and investment was being put into savings. They sacrificed as a church family, and they said, we're willing to take some of those savings and let's take him on and support him. So at that point, after 4 years of that, they took me on full time. And Pastor Covey was even willing to sacrifice some of his salary during that time to be able to take me on full time. So what a change that was, going from those two things down to one where I could concentrate on that, really developing and learning more from him. He's had a life, a wealth of knowledge and experience, and to spend time with him on a full-time basis that way and really truly being mentored, I really valued that.
Yeah, we spend a huge amount of time just talking about the logistics of it, because I find these stories amazing because, you and I have spoken about this in the past. I find that oftentimes the efforts and the work and the hours put in by pastors is so often overlooked, and especially if pastors of what was essentially a mission when you started, right? Because you guys were meeting in a school, you didn't, and it's a lot of work. I've seen, Pastor Tim Peachman do that. I've seen Pastor Tom do that. I've seen a lot of pastors doing this, what to me is like an unsustainable way of life, right? Because it's just because it's family life, it's paying the bills, and it's pastoring the church. Like I can't even imagine what those 3 days were like for you when it came to preparing your sermons, preparing for whatever group you were needing to take care of, whatever specials, whatever person in need in the assembly you had to deal with. It can get unmanageable very quickly.
And I mean, we're talking just on our level as being, say my level as being a pastor, but I also remember, like, I'm a husband too during this time. So there's all of that work that I had to do, but I recognize as well on my wife's end, the sacrifice, because that's a lot of hours away from home. And so our wives bear the brunt of that sacrifice too.
Indeed.
So for her, she's homeschooling, she's taking care of things. When I'm in the shop at that time, she was doing every appointment, every piece of paperwork, just because the time wasn't there. And so she really, for as much work as it was on my end, I would almost say it was even more on hers, just holding everything else down. So yeah, it's a tremendous sacrifice on a family all around.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I'd like to shift a little bit and talk a little bit on more the spiritual plane. Obviously, you felt the call to be a pastor, and I'm going to be asking the only answer to the question that's more frustrating than you'll just know is how did you know you had the calling of the Lord? How did you what things happened in your life? What things did you sense from the Lord that led you into the ministry? And being in the ministry now, what is your assessment of who you are as a pastor, right? Like I've known a lot of pastors in my years, and they all have their particularities. Some are more theological, doctrinal. Some of them are more evangelical, like going out street preaching and so on. Some of them are more relational. They're on the bedside of everybody who's sick and so on. So just speak to how the Lord brought you into the ministry and what kind of ministry you have or that you perceive that you have.
Yeah, this is a loaded question. So how do you know? Well, I would say the Lord works that in a couple unique ways. So as a young man, even as a boy, teenager, I was looking up to those that were in ministry. So I had a great uncle, my grandfather's brother. He was a church planting pastor in Canada. And so we had visited him before in his churches, and it always intrigued me, the work of the ministry. I always looked up to our pastors and intrigued by that, the people work and just their grace, their people skills that way was something that always intrigued me. So there was a curiosity aspect to that. But then there came a time where it developed into more of a burden aspect. And for me personally, I was able to take a missions trip with our youth group down to Mexico. And it was on that missions trip. I don't know what it was. I can't say definitely it was a voice from the clouds or a still small voice, but whatever it was, there was a burden or an unction or a passion placed in my heart from what I saw. My eye affected my heart on that trip. And I could not escape that. In fact, I gave a testimony when I was 16 coming back from that trip that something happened in my heart with such a burden that I told the Lord, I will follow you wherever you lead me. Little did I know all the way that the Lord would lead, but I just said there was a willingness. I'll be used of you, Lord, in whatever aspect. So having sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So no, I'm just curious. As you said that, I remembered a quote I heard a pastor friend of mine use once, and whenever I've shared this quote with various other pastors, I have to say it's almost 50-50 those who agree with it and those who disagree with it. So I'm interested to know your thoughts.
All right.
This pastor told me, if you want to know if it's the Lord's will for you to be a pastor, for you to be in ministry, if you can do anything else, if you can do anything else, do that.
I would agree. So here's what I would say to that is it's not a matter if I could do other things. I realize that I had other work abilities, but that whole time there was a holy dissatisfaction with it. It's not where my heart was. It's not where contentment came from. It's not where satisfaction of living came from. I did it to make a living. Could I have still been doing that? Absolutely. I still get called sometimes. Hey, you still welding? No, I'm not, So it's not that I could. I mean, I could, but there's a point in my life where I realized I shouldn't, but I must do this.
Tick the agree column.
Yeah. So it is unique. And to explain that, I would say you would have to live that. I mean, going from a young boy or a teen of a curiosity, watching pastors and ministry, to a point where, Lord, I'll do whatever you want me to do, but even the thought of standing up in front of people and speaking, preaching, that terrified me. So you got to understand, it's not like I grew up as a teenager just desiring the limelight. I didn't. I hated speaking, and that was my worst subject, my most feared subject. So in high school, if there was a speech, I'm telling you, my cheeks would be shaking, my knees would be knocking. I would sweat profusely. I would change all colors of red, and I hated talking. So when I surrendered to the Lord, saying, Lord, whatever you would have, I kind of knew that eventually it would take public speaking of some sort. And I thought, Lord, if I say yes to this, you better help me in these other areas, because there's no way.
I think the Lord loves calling people like that.
No. It's
No,
terrifying.
I'm serious.
It's
I'm
terrifying.
serious. I'm serious. I used to, like, a lot of people who are going to watch this are going to have trouble believing that I said this, but like, we would go out street preaching in the market, and for the hour before we went out, I was a nervous wreck, wreck. And 10 years of doing it, I was still a nervous wreck before going out. But it's like you said, I had to do it. Yeah, it wasn't an option. I had to do it. And it didn't matter that I was afraid. It didn't matter that I was nervous or anything. I just had to do it. And so I get it. I get exactly what you're saying. And I appreciate your explanation of what it is to have that burden, that conviction.
Well, I would say what I appreciate too is where the Lord directed our family during that time. So I was in the high school, but the church had a big heart to develop the next generation. And so there was opportunity to develop some of those ways. So for example, in our high school classroom, the teacher said every young man is going to lead in devotions on Tuesday mornings. And that wasn't an option.
Right.
We had to be ready for that. But because of the small class size, there was only, I think, 5 boys in there, 5 guys. I was one of 5. And so these opportunities were on a regular basis. Every 5 weeks, we were standing up and we were giving a devotional. It didn't have to be long, but it had to be on our memory work for that month. And we had to take one verse and come up with some type of an explanation of it in a devotional way. I dreaded it at the time, but now that I look back, I think that's genius,
Mm.
because you're giving these boys an opportunity that in other cases they would say, no way, I'm not doing it, and making it so that they are confronted with these, I think they're God-given and very good opportunities, right?
Right.
It didn't hurt me, it helped me,
Right.
right? So it did help to develop that ability, or that a little bit more of a comfort doing it, especially when you get to Bible college and you got to do it on a regular basis.
Mm.
But by that time, the Lord had really developed more of a heart for it.
Mm.
So it is a
So
unique way the Lord works through that.
so I know that you're probably filibustering around this question because I know that pastors don't like to talk about themselves that way. But what kind of pastor are you, Pastor? When you
Oh,
analyze your ministry, what kind of pastor are you?
it's always hard to be introspective, or look at self. So am I allowed to answer it? What kind of a pastor do I want to be?
Sure, sure. But like I'm going to interject either way, so carry on.
You make a good lawyer. The kind of pastor I want to be, if at the end of my life that someone's going to get up at my funeral and say this, was that he pastored with grace. That's
Mm.
how I want to be known. That's where I want to default to. Does that always happen? I hope so. I don't know, so because sometimes perception, right? How people perceive what I'm trying to give may not always be received that way. But from my heart, that's where my heart would be, is I want to pastor with grace. I realize I don't always come from everyone's background. So when someone comes in and something happens or they say it a certain way, I got to try and give benefit of the doubt. I try and meet it with grace. I hope that's how it's coming across, because that's where my heart is.
Well, I like you're going to love my answer here because that I think that is the pastor you are. And I think that we are the chief reason we are at Crosspoint right now is because I recognize that in you.
Mm.
Because I had sworn off an independent Baptist church.
Right.
And again, that that characteristic that you have won me over. I mistrusted you big time before.
Mm.
Having gotten to know you, yes, I think that that does summarize your probably what I would say is your biggest strength. I would put you in the relational class of pastors. I think you put your heart in your sleeve. I think people recognize that, and I think you like people, and because you like people, people like you, and I think that that's a real asset to have as a pastor. Other pastors have different assets, and when they lean into it, it's really good too. But for sure, so I would recognize that what you're aiming for. In my opinion, you're hitting the bullseye. You're doing
Oh,
well in. If
thank
you
you,
were
Luke.
to be self-critical now, if you were
Mm.
to think, what are the things that you wish you did more progress on, that you thought that you see like a weakness in yourself that you would like to either gain complete victory over or at the very least make progress in your years of ministry?
Yeah, I would say, and that's an open-ended question too, because there's many areas that I'd like to make progress in. So
Yep.
the yeah, I would say sometimes, I mean, seeing a vision of something, and sometimes the unfolding of it, and really taking that step to starting it, that would be sometimes my weakness, is seeing the process between seeing the first vision of it and the end goal. So sometimes stepping out, I can be a little hesitant, or slow, I should say, to step out. Sometimes I just want to have that further confirmed in my heart.
Mhm.
Um, I would like to say it's not a lack of faith, but sometimes there's a fear and intrepidation about that too, where you don't want to make the wrong decision or the wrong choice or the wrong step. And so maybe that's sometimes why I hold back. But that's somewhere where I'd like to make more progress on, is yes, knowing where to go. And sometimes I see that immediately, but taking that step to get there and acting on it. Sometimes I'm a little slow to take that.
Yeah. So I would imagine that this is it's kind of like the fear of messing things up, right?
Right.
That
Right.
things are going. This is a disease of
Yep.
when things go well, right?
Yep.
When things are going well, you want things to keep going well.
And that risk suddenly becomes something that you're averted to. But sometimes you got to realize, and I hear it said over and over and over, sometimes you got to fail 50 times before you start once.
Mm.
Well, sometimes you're just afraid of that failure mark because you're going to look back and say, oh, coulda, woulda, shoulda done this. But hey, that's life, right? But we got to just go ahead with some things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the ministry.
Yep.
Let's talk about specifically Crosspoint Baptist Church. So you've been basically head pastor at Crosspoint Baptist for how many years now?
It'll be starting 7 years, I think.
So 7 years. So I would imagine you've gotten to know your assembly pretty well in 7 years. If you were to, we're shooting you off to Timbuktu, and you're being asked to describe Crosspoint Baptist Church. How would you describe the ministry?
Short answer and long answer. Short answer, I always tell our church family, it's the best church in the world. And so I often tell them that, but that's my short answer. That's
You
how
got
I
a
would
bunch
describe
of
it.
applause right now.
Yeah. So yes, that's my short answer. Long answer would be we are a group of imperfect people learning to grow in grace. And when I say grow, it's literally that. It's a broad spectrum of people where we do have some mature believers, which is great, but we do have a number who are growing and maturing in the faith. So discipling, a number of first generation Christians. So with that is, yes, the excitement of first generation Christians, but at the same time, it's a lot of work to grow in depth, right?
Yeah, yeah. So if you going back even further than 10 years now,
Yeah.
when you were ministering with Pastor Covey, so this is going to sound a bit like a funny question, but do you feel that Crosspoint has kind of turned out the way you thought it would, or has it surprised you? In other words, did the ministry in those years progress in a way that you expected, or completely unexpected, or a bit of both?
A bit of both, but more so completely unexpected.
Mm.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's just by nature of what had happened in the church at the time. So, going from that time about 10 years ago where we're working together in a staff position, kind of co-pastoring near the end, we were moving towards really establishing a permanent place in the community with building a church building. But at the time, we're in a rental position, renting in a school. With that comes a unique dynamic.
Mm.
There's that unique dynamic of almost a little bit of an unsettledness, where you're always in that rental situation.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
there's an aspect of that. But as soon as we were able to, I mean, after we just transitioned the pastoral role, the church voted me in, we moved right immediately into a building phase and getting a church building, a permanent place in the community. Well, traditionally, once a church has that permanent place, especially in Eastern Ontario, it changes.
Mm.
It changes the perception from the
Mm.
community. Now they
Yeah.
look at you as being legitimate.
Yeah.
And there's something about the culture of Eastern Ontario, maybe
Mm-hmm.
some of the upbringing of some people, that they don't view a church being a church without some type of a
That's
structure
right.
there.
That's right.
So once we had that, we were noticed, we were recognized. There was a curiosity about that. Our goal has never been to transition people from one church to another. Whenever someone comes in, I'm always quick to meet with them and ask, why? Where are you from? Why are you coming? Our goal is new fruits. Now, just as a result of us being here, it has piqued the curiosity of some. Some have come from both different ways. But that's where the surprise factor came in, really, with the church growth. Once we were here in a building, it just naturally had some of that. So yeah, we're thankful for that, but that did surprise us.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say is Crosspoint's strongest asset? And then the opposite, what do you think is its weakness?
I think its strongest asset is something that was started years ago with Pastor Covey. He was a man of the Bible, a man of the word, and he preached the Bible. I think the preaching of the word of God, if we lose the centrality of that, we lose the focus of the church as a whole. why we're here. Preach the word, be instant, in season, out of season. And so I think that the way that the church was founded, and by God's grace, if that's the way that we can continue to go, I say that is a strong point of where we have been and where we should be going. And so if we can maintain that, I think that's a great emphasis. Another strength would be, I believe, friendliness of our church people. There is a welcoming nature there. And so I appreciate when people do that on a regular basis, and we try to breed that. We try to emphasize that, because that's a very important aspect, just that hospitality. Where I would like us to be moving more is to develop deeper connections as a community of believers. Now, for us right now, our weakness is with such, I mean, considering Canadian churches, it's a rapid growth, but with that comes the difficulty of really establishing a tight-knit community. So that's what we're up against right now, is very welcoming, growing quickly, but we really need to establish those roots of community and connection. And so trying to develop ways to do that. We've done different church programs and different things, but even outside of the church walls. So we're trying to develop some things for the next year that will help to deepen those roots of connection. Because once you have that, that's what people really will stick around in a church for, even through thick and thin. You know, if they're offended by one of my messages, they're not just going to head out the back door. They will stay because they've got some of those connections and they really know the heart of the church.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm going to use the prerogative of my podcast here to do a little bit of lobbying here. Prayer, Pastor, prayer.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. No, nothing will knit saints closer together than for us to be praying for each other and to be involved in each other's lives enough to know what to pray for each other about.
And along that line, we have started a 10-15 prayer time because we realize, that the ways of doing that, there's multiple ways, but yes, part of it is getting people praying together. People that pray together stay together.
Yes.
And so if we can get that more so we try and do that Sunday mornings, we're trying to do that Wednesday evenings, but trying to take more of an opportunity for that, even, you know, and we've been talking to even outside the walls of the church, where we're having prayer time during the week, you know, outside of church. So I would agree. Yeah.
So let's get into some controversy. Let's talk pandemic a little bit. Because like it or not, it has become a distinctive, right, of Crosspoint Baptist Church. There were not a lot of churches open for business during the pandemic. And a number of them, you know, went a month, 2 months without having any meetings. And then some of them stretched out to a year and more than a year. Some of them, and to be fair, in some cases, churches were in rental situations the way Carleton Baptist was, and then try and rent something during the pandemic, right? But at the same time, there are churches that had their own building and went a year plus, either online or outdoor meetings, or they broke up the assembly into small groups that met at various times. So Crosspoint took a little bit of a different approach. I know you guys tried to observe social distancing as much as you could, but at the same time, you felt it was important for people to come to the assembly, to come and meet together and have fellowship together. I am very interested to hear your thought process. What led you to make those decisions? And do you have any regrets about those decisions? What do you think what results came from what at the time was not just a complicated decision to make, but a controversial one too?
Yeah. So if we're talking difficulty in ministry, that's going to be the highlight of every pastor's life, is looking back on those years. When you're talking controversy, yeah, for sure. So the way I look back at it now is kind of learning how to navigate controversy, because you couldn't just eliminate it. It was there. And you know how that was in every social part of society. Every fabric of society was then just suddenly highlighted by controversy, because the moment you took one view, you've got 10 that were on the other side. And so being in, the unique role of a pastor, I'll tell you, boy, I was the world's worst person. And then I was the world's best person, depending on who you're talking to.
Yep.
So there had to come a point, I think, where with all of the turmoil in your own heart and mind, thinking, am I making the right decision? Am I doing the right thing? That I think pastors had to come to the point where they saw what they were doing was best for their church before the Lord. And so there are some things I couldn't get away from. The Bible says clearly that we're not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. And the part that I couldn't get away from was that we need to be doing that more and more as we see the day approaching. None of us know when the Lord's return is. So I knew we had to be together. Now, it comes down to definitions. And haven't we lived through the world of definitions and technicalities? What does the word together mean? For my own heart and in light of scripture, together in the book of Acts, in fact, I preached through the book of Acts during that time, together was in person, because they were still able to baptize, share the Lord's Supper together, and they were breaking bread together that way. And so all of these definitions of that, I thought, in all of the times past, they always found a way to do it throughout persecution, throughout hard times. They always found a way to get together. So it comes to this, and you're ordered to not be together. Looking back, the one regret I think I would make, and this might, I guess, offend some, is that we didn't get back together sooner. So I think it was March 19th. I don't know why that date sticks in my mind. I'd have to go back and look at it. March 19th, 2020, I think was the first Sunday that we weren't together.
It sounds right.
Yeah, and I don't know why it's so etched in my brain, but there was countless hours getting ready for that, because suddenly I had to do something I've never done before. Sit in front of a camera like what we're doing today and preach. Never done that before. To nobody in the room. Never done that before. And so all of these firsts that were happening, nobody really knew what was happening. So we thought, let's just take the safe approach and just see first. And so doing that, number one, it didn't feel natural to me. And there's just something that felt wrong about it. But we went along, just like I think most every other church did, all the way up until about June. During that time, from May to June, I was doing whatever I could to press the point that the church is part of the social fabric of society. And I was trying to approach community heads, counselors, MPs, trying to make meetings with them, email them, talk to them, and trying to explain our point that people are not doing well being apart, and that the church can add such a thing to help people, and we'll do it responsibly. I said, you're allowing people to shop in stores and they're coming up with a responsible way of doing it. I said, you don't think that they're responsible suddenly when they walk into a church. So along with a group of other churches, there was some letters written and some signatory lists done. And I signed on to that because I felt very strongly that the church should be together. It was about middle of June, I believe, when the province of Ontario said that churches could meet together with certain restrictions. As soon as they said that, we met.
Right.
And from that point on, we always found a way to navigate through all of the shutdowns, everything else, so that we could be together in some type of a physical presence. Now, that wasn't always to the extent that some wanted it to be, and it was sometimes beyond where some wanted it to be. So we tried to strike that balance there of, yes, respecting government, because you take a stand in some ways that they say you shouldn't, and you will pay the heavy price of that heavy hand on you. And at the same time, being true to the Bible. So I felt we could be true to God's word within the guidelines that Ontario was given. I realized it wasn't this way everywhere, so we can't compare even regions of Canada, let alone regions of the States. For Ontario, I'm saying they always provided a way that we could do it. Now, you had to be creative. And we were certainly creative within the letter of the law. To some, the accusations came that we were breaking the law, but we showed the direct guidelines that we stayed right within it. And so I'm thankful now that we look back and that we endeavored to stay together in some form and fashion. Now, again, that was from like parking lot services to meetings of 10 to 30% capacity per room.
Mhm.
We played with whatever we could to stay within the law.
Mhm.
And I believe we did so responsibly. And the Lord really blessed through that time. Our church didn't suffer physically because of it. In fact, I believe we grew spiritually because of that stand.
I would agree with that. Just to mine down a little bit more into the controversy, do you think that do you think that what we all went through and the deference that was given to the government and how quickly certain assemblies folded in the face of the pressure, do you think that that might come back to bite in the future? In other words, we've done this now, right? Like we've shut down churches now. Like this has become a thing now that with a call to an emergency, under the pretense of an emergency, um, real or perceived, it is now kind of like a thing that Walmart can be open with an unlimited number of people in it, but churches can be shut down.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. I think I would add this to that is I don't know where we're going to get more problems from the government or from people. So
Mm,
there are some people that willingly would follow again
mm,
and do everything. Now, the government now knows that most churches would do that. So I think there may be some liberties that may be taken. I
yeah,
think our main struggle is going to be causing people to realize, listen, there has to be that distinction there where the church still has to meet together. So,
yeah,
yeah, Christians across Canada, I mean, that's going to be a dividing thing for sure,
yeah. I was
unfortunately.
I was really disappointed that, like in the United States, a lot of court cases ended up in favor of believers and churches. And I
Yeah,
always, that always comforted me to see that because, that will cause governments to think twice about
right.
repeating. But in Canada, every single piece of litigation has failed. It has all gone the government's way. And I just think that,
We
and
don't
it's
have
one,
Yeah, we don't have the same backbone that the states has with their constitutional rights.
yeah,
Canada has these notwithstanding clauses,
correct.
and that is really where those liberties were taken with, was that exact clause.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of wrestling over that. I was on a number of Zoom calls with pastors across Canada that we wrestled about those things. Like, we know what Scripture says, we've got that conviction, but where do we balance that out with honoring the government that God has placed over us?
Mm.
And that was a huge struggle. But yeah, next time I think the Canadian government, depending on who's in charge, now our prayer is next election that things change a little bit.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
with someone else in charge, it might look totally different.
Yeah. Okay, we'll leave COVID. We're going to deal with another little controversy. It's not, I mean, it's not, it's been a controversy in my life.
Hmm.
And this being my podcast, I figured I'd throw that in there. So, Crosspoint is an independent Baptist church. Um, Independent Baptists in Canada and the United States, in generalities, I'm speaking in generalities,
Right.
they do tend to have a reputation for fundamentalism, for rigidness, um, even sometimes for harshness. Right?
Hmm.
It's the usually Baptist churches are independent because they have defined doctrines, they have defined practices, and any deviation from it is not well received at all. Right? Um, I'd like to have your thoughts on the independent Baptist movement in general, right?
Hmm.
Like what 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 community of independent Baptists that you have been involved with in particular. So basically the large scope, your particular scope, and basically, I suppose, what are given I don't exactly know how you're going to answer the large and small scope, but ultimately, how are do you see it favorably Do you see independent Baptists do you view it in a positive light? Do you see it in a negative light? Do you see a little bit of both? Um, because, like I said, you won me over. When I went to the website and I saw independent Baptist, that was a no for me. Like instantly, that was a no. I had been part of an independent Baptist church for 15 years, and I swore when I left I'd never do that again.
Mm.
So there's others like me out there, right? And there's some that wouldn't even try it. Like forget the 15 years, like they just never would cross the door. So yeah, just speak to your perspective, and was I and the people who are poisoned against it, are they in the wrong? Like, are they not seeing it right?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I guess where I'd like to start off, number one, is my heart goes out to those that have been hurt in any circle. It doesn't matter what circle or branch or whatever you want to call it is out there. If there's a history, there's always going to be some part of it that has a stain on it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that to start with. I would say where we would most identify with is, I'm going to push back a little on your terms, okay? Independent, I'm going to say we're unaffiliated. Okay. I believe the term independent does carry with it, in some people's minds, some of the negatives of the past. I don't want to be identified with the negatives of the past, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So our structure as a church is unaffiliated. We're not affiliated with the fellowship or the convention. Our group of believers here is a group of believers that gathers together to follow the scriptures. We preach and teach God's word. We endeavor to follow the Lord together. The fundamental term, again, even though at its very roots it had the right meaning,
Mm-hmm.
it has taken on an image or a descriptor of something negative.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say if we go back to the original meaning of that, the fundamental, I believe in the fundamentals of the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And coming back to that, the doctrines of the faith, and I know you would too. Now, that term has been ascribed to, and I get where you're going with this, but I just wanted to start there.
Yeah.
Because the term Independent Fundamental Baptist Church has quite a history. And where I don't want to be identified with is part of the negative part of that history. Along with the negatives are a lot of positives. There's a lot of men that have blazed the trails of good, solid Bible preaching, expository preaching, soul winning, a passion for missions, and a passion for the Lord, outreach, and those different things. That's the part of thing that I would like to be identified with or known for. Part of the negatives of that, yeah, I can look back in some of the churches that I have seen, sat in, been acquainted with, is some of that, like you said, part of that harshness. The difficulty with that is I think some of those men were truly believing that their passion was coming through. It, for all the passion that they had, it was being received as harshness.
Mm.
I don't think there was a balance many times of truth with love. And I think the moment that that balance gets out of whack a little bit is where you do tend into that harshness bit. Along with that harshness came a dictatorial attitude, like I am the pastor, kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for, of the pastor's role. It was the almost
pastoral
like
pastoral authority.
yeah, that pastoral authority role that was abused. I am the man of God, you know, and don't question what I say because I study the word, just do as I say. And I know that's not the case for everybody, but that's the reputation that had been developed. I don't want that. And I guess rewinding back to the question of what do I want to be known for? I want to be known for truth with love, grace in the way that we conduct ministry. So describing our church, I pray that the descriptors aren't part of the negative, but they look at it and say, okay, biblically based, holding to the fundamentals of the faith, the doctrines that matter, because doctrines do count, you know, and we do have to hold to those. Now, how you hold to doctrine, there's the fine balance of it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the, like the book I have on my shelf, The Art of Pastoring, is balancing those things out. And so, yeah, I agree with what you're saying, because there have been many who have been hurt by some of those abuses of that or strong-handedness.
Have you experienced that? Have you seen that?
Oh, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. And again, that's probably in every circle. It doesn't matter where you are and what denomination you are. There's probably going to be some that you encounter. If you've been any length of time, you're going to encounter some negativity. You're going to encounter some individuals that definitely don't rule with the right hand. So yeah, we have encountered that. Now,
My
that's a big learning experience
my
because
experiences has been that usually, and this is where things are not, the word isn't paradoxical, because it's not paradoxical. It actually makes sense, but it tends to be the churches that want a good standard, right? Like, in other words, that have well stated, clear positions, right? Like when you're in a church that's like a big tent church where people of various doctrines are all commingling, and it, right? When things get too permissive, well, then you wind up in another problem, right? Where there's no headship, there's just confusion and trouble. But I think that it is you're right. I don't think that independent Baptists are the only ones with this particular problem, but I will say that it tends to be churches that have well-defined doctrinal statements that end up
yeah.
with that problem.
And I would say, and known for that word that you said there, and known for standards, right? Statements and standards and principles. So I'll use a case in point. Just recently, I know of an elderly gentleman who just had retired from a church that has a reputation for standards. And one of the things that was written about it from another older gentleman is, I appreciate him because of his strong standards. That was the first thing that was mentioned. I sat back and I thought about that for a minute. I thought, the first thing you mention that you appreciate is his strong standards. If anything, I would be like you and I would see that, and that communicates to me only one thing: a church I don't want to be in. And that's part of sometimes the reason why I'm saying that is sometimes some of those previous experiences in my own life. That being said, I can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No.
Right? I learned a lot in those things. Some things I learned not to do. Some things I learned to do, right? And so I am what I am today as a result of my experiences. And so some of those experiences were pretty tough words, tough leadership, that type of a thing. Do I lead that way today? No, but I am developed from that. So I pray that we all learn from our circumstances and we grow better, not bitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me we're going to try this. I'm going to
Okay.
try and share a video because it just kind of, for those who haven't been in these circles, right? Like, might not know, what I'm talking about.
Go to sleep while I'm talking. Hey! Don't you lay your head back. I'm important. I'm somebody. Now you might do your English teacher that way, but I'm not teaching English. I'm teaching eternal life here. I love you. You know I love you. Have I convinced you I love you? Yeah. You better nod your head yes. All right. Come on, put it out there. All right. You stay awake and you listen to me. You say, well, he may never come back. Well, he ain't here now. And where have you been, Mr. Underwood? And I noticed on the calendar I'm supposed to marry y'all. What makes you think I'd marry you? You're one of the sorriest church members I have. You're not worth 15 cents. And you want me to marry you to her? And you want to marry him? And he don't even know where he belongs? And you don't even know where you belong? Now, let me tell y'all, everybody here, how much I love these kids. Do you know I love you, sir? Stand up, big boy. Do you know I love you? All right. All right. Give me a little love. I'm the real deal. All right. I know you are too, but you ain't been here. You can't get this in any other church in town. Now, y'all don't want me. All you got to do is tell me. We won't have a church fight, because I'll get my little Connie and we'll get in her little Buick Enclave. It's paid for, and we'll sell what we need to sell, and we'll go on down the road and we'll find some little podunk church that don't know up from down, and I'll find me a dozen Joe's baskets who don't have a pot or a window and who will shout Jesus, and I'll give the rest of my life to them. But I'm not interested in recreating the prostitute of the church. Amen. You remember when I came here, Kelly? You remember where your wife was, where your sisters were? Do you remember where they were? And we made holy war. Do you remember that? Stay with me. Don't quit me. Oh, Brandy's a sweet girl and she's got her children. Yes, y'all are good and y'all are fine, but your children will turn on you if you don't hold up the standard and the banner of God. And if they don't turn on you, you'll just produce nice little whirlians. Amen. Are y'all keeping the camera on me back there in the little video room? Good. We're having trouble in the video room. There's no one finer than young Cox back there. And he comes down here and spends hours in that thing. But he has a little attitude adjustment that we're going to fix it. Brother Cox, you listening? Because, Brother Cox, I can fix your attitude adjustment. And I don't care what your mama thinks and your daddy thinks. And I don't have a better friend than your mama. But, Mama, you get out of my way when I'm messing with that boy, because I'm his preacher. I'm yours when I'm talking to you. But I'm his when I'm talking to him. And last I checked, he's a grown man. And that video room ain't going to be a youth hangout. We might as well just fix this thing. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Well, if you don't know what you're doing wrong, son, you don't care about what I want to do right. Because if you loved me and you submitted to me, you'd know what my heart is and my message is, and you wouldn't go about establishing your own kingdom in the video room. I really feel good now.
Okay. So, the whole video starts because one of the congregants is falling asleep. That's what triggers the pastor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Triggers, good word.
like quite explosively too, right? Yeah. And it's interesting when he sees the person falling asleep, he orders the person to not fall asleep, and then he says, and this is remarkable, he says, hey, I'm somebody here. I'm preaching the word of God, right? Yeah. Then he goes down and speaks to the fellow and humiliates him publicly, but then tells him that he loves him. Yeah. And then he turns his attention to a fellow who's seated a couple of seats behind Eutychus there, who's falling asleep, and basically says, you haven't been coming to church regularly, and you want me to marry you, and he humiliates him as well. So he basically goes through the assembly calling out various people for their sins, and real or perceived, and he then goes back to the front, and I think he can, at this point, the pressure's gone down a little bit from inside of him. And so then he starts feeling the need to give explanations, right? And his explanation was that he was a man of God. He led the church, and it was important for him to bring these corrections. And he'd make these little gestures going, yeah, it felt good, when you knew he didn't feel good. He just was putting on bravado. But I think that a pastor like that knows deep inside that that's beyond the pale, that should not be done. And yet, I think that pastors who want to see spiritual growth, not necessarily numerical growth, but spiritual growth, they want to see, because listen, the bottom line is this: it's not good to fall asleep in a sermon, right? Right. And it's not good for somebody to not be regular in their attendance. And right. He called out some young people in the sound booth or something. That's not good either. I get all that, but at the same time, this practice of you know, humiliation is what it is, basically, right? It's
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I'd have a number of comments on that. Number one, in our day and age, any day and age, I don't see that as being acceptable. And I think any normal person in society would see that as being offensive, rude, and way out of the realm of where leadership should be. Um, Many times when I see that, number one, he's obviously a very insecure man about some other aspect in life. I don't know. I don't know him personally, but it does communicate that to me. That being said, I wonder, and I'm just throwing this out there, and it's no excuse, but I wonder how much of that is attributed to even changing of generations. Like I see it happening, and again, it's no excuse, but even in the military, the way that the military was dealt with years ago, nowadays you speak to some higher ranking members. I spoke with one a few weeks ago, and they're retiring because they can't deal with the way that they must deal with this new generation.
yeah,
And I think part of the way that the older generation did it, they got a lot accomplished. It was directly head on. They dealt with things. But nowadays it doesn't communicate that.
yeah,
If anything, the way that we're receiving that type of an approach is one, you don't really like me. You can say all you want to say. You can say you love me. I don't believe it because I'm going to believe your actions. So I think the way that our generations today are receiving that, it is not communicating well. And so and we do have a number who have come up even under that type of older leadership that, yeah, have been hurt by that. And it's unfortunate.
Have you seen anything like that? We'll admit this made national news because
Oh, yeah.
this was really over the top,
Oh,
right?
that was crazy. Yeah.
Right. But have you seen any degree of this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Public shaming.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. For sure. And you know what? When that happens, as you're sitting in the congregation, you're sitting there looking at it going,
Yeah.
really? Is that right?
Yeah.
You know, even as a young person in Bible college, I would sometimes look at that and go, can we get back to the Bible here? You know, because sometimes they take great liberties with that. So I think that style of leadership, if that actually, I wasn't alive back then, but if it worked back then, it should stay back then. Because maybe it spoke to their generation of just like head-on confrontation. Okay, that was for then. I think we need to grow with the times and grow with the generations. For example, I don't like being on live stream every week. But that is part of our generation now. That is where we're at, right?
Yeah.
So we do it. I just don't enjoy it. But I do believe we need to grow. And sometimes that's going to be out of our comfort zones that way too. So we always need to be, as pastors, as leaders, in tune with where we're at too, you know, and there's a delicate balance too, because I'm describing this, but always holding to the fundamentals of the faith, the doctrines of the faith that we've been given. Now, how we do that, that's a delicate balance.
So let's talk about that though, because that, you know, to a certain extent, the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
Literally, the devil is in the details, right?
Yeah.
So I have seen, you know, I've been at Crosspoint now for a short period of time, but I have seen you deal with difficult situations. May I say difficult individuals as well?
Right.
And so tell me, like whether it's a matter of doctrine or practice, because it can really be either one, right? In a matter of doctrine or practice, where something is going on in the assembly that ought not to be taking place, all right, or it is not, it does not measure up to the standard of Crosspoint Baptist Church. What do you, as a pastor, what is your approach? What is your go-to to, you know, to certain, like, this is going to sound a little brash, but to deal with the situation, to try and get a handle on the situation, and to try to move things in a way that you feel is productive for the assembly?
Right. I'd say number one, check myself, check my heart. Why am I feeling this way? And is it just me noticing that? Because if I don't check my emotions at the door and seriously consider that, then I'm going to respond improperly. So checking myself is multifaceted, right? It's going to other counselors, trusted counselors, explaining the situation, listening carefully, being willing to change. maybe an approach or timing. Yeah.
Do you have local counselors in the sense that, like, who does the pastor talk to? Because that to me too is an important thing, right? Like, if the pastor only has a counselor in his father or a pastor out of town or something like that, that says something, right? Like that. Like, so I'm not asking you to name your counselors, but like geographically, where are your counselors?
Yeah, I have some local and some beyond, right? Because I think part of that too is, yeah, there's going to be some that are local that may be even part of the situation, which is fine. But then getting a non-biased opinion, I think, is important too, and balancing those out. So yeah, I've got some at a distance that I'll meet with, I'll talk with, I'll explain the situation and saying, all right, from the outside looking in, check me on this. What do you see? But also from the inside looking out, I do have some within that I go to, and I try to be very careful about that because, I mean, mainly I would say I go to our deacons with problems within the church, because not only are they servants in the church, I believe that the Bible describes them as men who are more mature or in the word.
Above
And so
reproach.
I need to respect that God has them in that position for a reason. And hey, there's an opportunity to counsel with them too.
Good. All right. Well, we're gonna step away from the controversy now.
So we can breathe.
I love study Bibles that have introductions to the books. That gives you a sense of what the book is about and so on. And there's usually a section called geographic and historical context, right? Because that always informs what the people in that time dealt with, and we have our own geographic and cultural context. So the next couple of questions I want to ask you revolve around this. So our country, Canada, because I love this question because it really, really gives people an idea of where a pastor thinks he's ministering. Okay, so the question is this: if you were to rate Canada's spiritual health on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolute Satanism and 10 being Christ's kingdom on earth, where would you put your rating for this country?
Oh man, you may like this question, but okay, I'm speaking from the context. In the past 2 months, I have been coast to coast in churches and had the opportunity to see literally across Canada, right? So it is a unique dynamic or a unique vantage point that way. I'm not sure if I can take Canada as a whole. I would say Canada is so diverse, it's crazy. So I see Ottawa as a unique pocket. I see the East Coast as a totally unique pocket, and West Coast. So if I was to gather them all together as a whole, it's going to have to like average out somewhere. I'd say we're in a downwards trending 4 to 5 or 5 to 4, spiritually speaking.
And what about right where you are?
Right where we are, I think we're the ones pulling it down at the 4 mark. There is a secularism in Ottawa that is unlike other things that I see across Canada. I don't know why that is, and I've talked with many people that way, but having ministered in the Toronto area, in the States, and been in different churches, it's almost as if, and I'm not going to blame the government, but it's almost as if there is in a government town a secularism that other communities don't have. That to me is the great divider between our countries here, or all of our country, is Ottawa is in a unique pocket. I don't know what fully adds to that. I don't know if it's from the cultural religious heritage in Eastern Ontario, Quebec, where there's an upbringing where people are coming from a lot of religious abuse, and there's a big pushback against that. I see that in the East Coast. I was just in Newfoundland, and they're going through the throes of some of that right now. So it could be attributed to that. I don't know exactly, but it does seem like Ottawa is a unique pocket.
Yep. So in the book of Revelation, the Lord sent 7 letters to 7 churches. So along the same lines of the first question about Canada's geographic and historical context, if the Lord wrote a letter to the churches of Canada, what kind of letters would it be? Would it be a Philadelphia type church? You know, you've got an open door that no one can shut and things are going well, or would it be you've let Jezebel in, or you're neither hot nor cold? What would that letter be like? Would we be happy about that letter? Would we be sad about that letter?
I think in the opening paragraphs, we wouldn't be happy. I think it would be first two paragraphs, the Laodicean approach. But I would hope that the Lord would see in our future, in the days ahead, to be addressing more of a Philadelphia by the conclusion. I see cyclical natures or cyclical patterns of the Lord's hand at work, even through revivals in history past. I pray we're on an slowly coming around for the uptick, right? I see us going like this, and I just pray we're on that curve coming back up. I think there have been enough generations of secularism, abuse, whatever you want to call it, in the past, where people are starting to open their eyes and say, okay, if all of that has happened, where is truth? Where can we find truth? And I pray that that search is going to be happening soon. We're seeing some of that with people coming in our doors. I actually just talked to a couple this past week. First time in church was last Sunday. They came back this past Sunday, and they're from two different backgrounds as a couple. They started looking at what they were involved in, and they said, this can't be right. There's no fulfillment. There's no satisfaction. There's no contentment. There's no truth. So what they did as a couple is they found the Bible and they started reading the Bible. They started researching online, and this is part of the benefit of being online, is they started watching some messages. They actually started watching some of Charles Stanley and some older messages. And they were noticing that he was teaching the Bible.
Yeah.
And they listened to enough that they're like, he's teaching the Bible. It's making sense. It's speaking to us in some way. So what they started doing is looking in the community, and they visited a number of churches, and they've gone from church to church to church to church, trying to find someone who would teach the Bible. They came back because they said, you teach the Bible. I said, wow, is this a novel thing? Like, what are churches doing? But the amount of times that I've heard that now over the past 3 to 4 years, we come back because you teach the Bible. I'm baffled. I don't get out to many churches in the community and hear it, but man, if that's the case in our community, we need to be coming back to that more.
So as you know, I'm involved in a Christian school. I mean, a Christian, very big tent, right? And I can tell you that there is a number of churches that do not study or present the Bible in any kind of faithful way. Right. It's not. I would go so far as to say that there are far more of those churches than churches that are actually giving something of the Word of God. I think we've tipped that scale a long time ago.
Right.
Yeah. Given that situation, like you gave it you're giving the nation a 4 or 5, and you're giving our particular area more of a 4, like basically dragging down. So, like I'm pretty sure you'll agree with this. I think that Crosspoint would receive a Philadelphia type letter. I do, because I put that. I say that not just because I like the people and so on. I say that because of the growth, because of the interest, because of like the Lord is blessing the church. There's no doubt about it. You know what I mean? And you can part of the credit probably goes to you and Pastor Moses. A lot of the credit goes to the people who come and contribute and so on.
But you can't manufacture that. That's what's unique about that is when we stand back and look at it and say, are we offering huge, expensive programs and different? We're actually not. We're doing the basics, and that has happened. So what is attributing that to that? I don't know, other than we need to stay faithful with what we're doing.
So would you say the church's response to the slide, right? If the church is to be in any way, shape, or form part of the answer, can you bring, is there, other than the basics, is there anything else that the church should be doing in this part of the country right now?
Well, I guess I wouldn't excuse the basics. I would say the basics, like we've already mentioned, is prayer.
Hmm.
I think for the future, we have to be there, right? We have to continue with prayer. Now, whether that is part of the basics, yeah, we need to remember the ABCs.
Mm,
Spending time in prayer, being people of the word, and
mm,
continuing with outreach.
mm,
And I mean, we can come up with other programs to help to support those, but we have to keep those as the main thing, right? Keep the main thing as the main thing. And so whatever we do as a church as a whole, it has to support those basics.
mm. Closing questions.
Okay.
And these are questions that I play with in my head from time to time, and I enjoy even revisiting these questions. So you're a Baptist pastor, and that tells us a lot about your spiritual convictions and your doctrinal positions. Can you share with us a Christian practice, um, whether it's a practice, a belief, or even a style
Hmm.
that's from another denomination that you appreciate, that you would even like to see incorporated? Like I'll give you just some of my pet ones a couple of years ago we visited the Reformed Presbyterian Church on Woodruff here in town, and they sing the Psalms,
Hmm.
and they sing it a cappella.
Hmm.
Pastor, it's like being in heaven. Like it's just beautiful. Like it is
Yeah.
just beautiful. Also, like when we visit my wife's family, we visit a Brethren church in London, and they take an hour for the Lord's table.
Wow.
You know,
Yep.
they pray and they approach the elements really, really slow with a lot of prayer. And I like it. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
it's cool.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing. Are there any things that obviously you probably don't have as much time to visit assemblies and so on, but surely you through contacts and
Hmm.
anything that you've seen other denominations do it, you think, yeah, that's cool. That's something that I could get behind.
I mean, I appreciate both of the things you've mentioned. I've been in those types of services in other churches where it's like no instruments, just voices. I
Mm,
think the best instrument on earth is the one that God made for us. So
mm,
yeah, I mean, it's beautiful, especially if you have people that can sing parts and harmonize and all that. Amazing. In fact, we do that in our service at times. We'll say, let's drop the instruments, and we have beautiful instruments and many of them,
yeah.
but there's something about just voices. So yeah, I mean, I would agree with that one for sure. The time around the Lord's table, I was just in a service just this past Sunday afternoon. Actually, I was preaching in a service in town, and they did some time for the Lord's Supper. They actually did it before the whole service,
Mm,
and they took that time just as a church family. And I thought that was unique. I chatted with the pastor after about that, and it lended to what you're saying there. Just a seriousness about this family practice, this church
mm,
family practice. And I guess I could appreciate that. Now, we haven't done it that way, but I'm not saying that we won't. I've
mm,
got some different ideas with that coming up for next year. And so we always want to try and do things biblically. I'd say I'm open to pretty much anything as long as it's following a method or an order in scripture.
mm.
I think where churches go wrong is when they just try something new for the sake of being new and different, right?
Just be
So
trendy.
yeah, while there's many things that I would, you know, maybe look at and say, oh, that's neat, but I got to be careful to temper that out and
Mhm.
say, is this biblical? I on the spot, I'm not sure if I can think of any more that I would add to that. I think you brought up some good ones. I would say there are churches and services that I've been to where there has been a more reflective, passionate approach to even some of the songs, more meditative, reflective in some of the songs, taking the time to explain the lyrics more as to a
Mm,
scriptural
mm,
basis, so that when you sing the song, you're really comprehending the meaning of scripture behind what you're singing. To me, the part of the service that sometimes moves me, I don't know if people notice this, but sometimes I'm sitting on stage and I'm just like moved to tears, right?
mm.
And I got to be like, okay, snap out of it. I can't think of this. I got to speak in a moment here, right? But there are songs that just get me right to the core of my heart because they're so beautifully written. I think if we were to pause some more in those times, I think the Lord could really prepare our heart throughout the whole of the service, not just through the preaching.
What is the one thing that, in your opinion, the church is not addressing properly or outright failing at?
Whew. Not addressing properly. Ours in specific or as a whole?
The church as a whole.
Okay.
Again, you've known a lot of churches. You've been a Christian for a long time. You've seen the ups and downs. You've seen the trajectory of the country. You've seen the trajectory even of the world, right? Like the things that have been going on. What things concern you about the Church of God that you're like this is a failure. This is something that, if not addressed, is going, we won't be the city on the hill. We won't be the salt.
Yeah, I'd say sometimes a tendency to follow public opinion rather than strictly just the word of God, regardless. It's not, and being in a capital city here, I liken it to like politicians, right? Which way is the wind blowing? Church growth should never come down to I wonder which way people feel. Like we're not going to do a survey and say, all right, for the year ahead, what should our sermons be themed around? What should happen here and there? Church isn't public opinion. It's what saith the Lord, and that's where we need to be following. What I fear is sometimes for the sake of growth, and sometimes I think pastors feel the necessity or the pressure for growth, because if a church isn't growing, then what are you doing wrong? And they feel that reflection is on them. And sometimes it could be. I'm just saying, in all of that pressure, there is sometimes that pressure just to conform to what popular opinion would say. And I would say as a nation, our nation is made up of public opinion surveys. And people really structure businesses that way. They structure political campaigns that way. We just can't structure the church that way. And I think that's a big mistake when we start going that way.
I think that's spot on. I have a brother in the Lord that I actually love and respect deeply. I think he's a good saint. But I remember having a conversation with him some time ago, and he was mentioning how the church that he was involved with wasn't growing as much as in the past. And he said something along the lines of that the church needed to do a better job at promotion. He used the word promotion. And I can't remember if I said this or not, or if I just thought it, but I said, like, don't you mean evangelism? Like, don't you mean like, don't you mean like declaring the truth? But I found it curious that he used that word. And I think it was one of those slips where he had come to think this way, right? Because that's how the business world works. It's how the political world works. It's it's all about brand recognition and so on.
Yeah.
And
that being said, that's a difficult line to toe, because not everyone's going to agree. Now, my nature is not confrontation. I despise it. I hate meetings like that. But saying that you're going to stay true to some things, it's not going to settle well with some people. So I say that in light of the fact that, our church has gone through some growth over these years, but I mean, I can't be sitting here saying that hasn't come with its struggles. In the past few months, even, I mean, let alone years, but few months. For as much growth has happened, some have just fallen away, and some of that with confrontation. But I got to meet it as graciously as I can, leaving an open door for them to return. But at the same time, I'm not going to chase them down the road saying, oh, come back, because we'll do this for you. That's not where we should be appealing to people, right? We need to be all coming in line with God's word. And if they can't do that, well, God bless them. And if they can find somewhere that they get that, okay. But at the same time, I gotta stay true with what the Lord is leading me in. And I'll tell you, sometimes it leads to some uncomfortable meetings.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a blessing being a pastor. I also know that it is a burden. It is difficult. It's difficult work, and all too often it's thankless work. So from me to you, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know, when we had a conversation with Danny Covey not too long ago. I don't think that this made it into the video, but he was talking about the day when you as a pastor became his pastor.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience as well, where the moment arrived where I thought, yep, that man is my shepherd. He's doing good work. He's doing the Lord's work. And you know, in a past devotional of mine, I encouraged my viewers to care for faithful pastors, because you are target number one for Satan and the principalities of powers. Because if Satan knocks you out, then he knocks out, you know, the leadership of the assembly. So thank you for your service. Thank you for the time that you've given me this evening. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure that my audience is also going to love, you know, the just this sharing of information, giving a chance people to get to know you.
Well, if I could just say thank you for the opportunity. And often I'm asked, you know, what can we do for you, Pastor? And many people ask that. I'm going to say the number one thing is pray for us. Pray for me, but pray for my wife as well. Because if anything, it's, yeah, if I'm up front and different things and doing different things, you got to realize the teamwork involved. So pray for us and then pray for our family. That is the greatest thing that you could do for your pastor. So if you're watching from a distance, maybe even from our own community, and you don't have a church home, you're welcome here. All right. You feel free to come. And Luke has the coordinates and the address. And if he can share that in the comment section, our website, whatever, for this podcast, we'd love to be a blessing to you and to your family. If you're watching from a distance outside of our community and you don't have a church, we are online. And if we can minister to you in some way, please let us know.
So all that information is going to go into the video description along with this video. And yes, absolutely, come meet me, come meet Pastor. It'll be fantastic. We love visitors. We love to see the church grow. Pastor, stick around for us to say our proper goodbyes. But for now, thank you very much, viewers, to have watched through this interview. I hope it's been a blessing to you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.